Jack, how you doing?
Yeah, you're set, Matt.
All right, just. Okay, so Ryan Hawk's here, Justin's here, Jack is here. Bradley Kaiser, are you here? Bradley's not here. Rita's here. Falco, are you here? What about Carolyn? Carolyn Schweiger, is she here?
She's not yet, Matt.
All right, I'm here. Cynthia's here. David's here, and Brian O'Malley, is he here?
I don't believe so.
All right. All right, are there any
Falco is here
public
as well.
excuse me, what was that?
It's Falco.
This
Falco,
is
hey,
Falco. I'm here.
Hey, welcome, Falco.
Yep.
Are there any public comments for the agenda items? We have a few public from the public are here. You guys got anything? All right, nothing heard.
I'm going to comment later.
Roger. So approval of the previous meetings. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. All right, so the previous meetings minutes are approved. Any communications or reports that anybody has?
From a progress report standpoint, in terms of the evaluation of understanding population as far as citizens and crimes and those statistics, and trying to understand police force necessary to staff accordingly. I'm still in the process of that. I actually got some information from the state of Commonwealth of Pennsylvania regarding some statistics, so I'm going through those. My next phase will be to reach out to Chief regarding as far as our crime statistics, and then his leadership to start the initial draft of what we think as far as the size of the police force should be currently, and maybe if there's a deficit, what that deficit is, and based off of what data. And I'll be bringing back that first draft then to this board as far as to discuss that data and to hopefully move forward with coming up with some suggestions as far as how we can continue to monitor that and use that data to help us. So I'm probably about 3 to 4 weeks out as far as next phase.
So you're looking at the next board meeting to be able to report out on this.
Yeah, I what I'd like to do is get this data to everyone prior to that, at least a week prior to that. So it gives an opportunity for them to read and opine. And then at that next board meeting, we'll have the formal discussion.
Sounds good. Do you need any help at this time? Or are you still one man band?
Okay. Probably in about a week, I'll reach out. I might need a couple eyes on as far as just from editing purposes, make sure I'm in the realm I need to be in. But I'll reach out to the board.
All right, sounds good. Anything else on communications or reports?
I just have a question that we began our review of all the rules and regulations last week, but we are not making any final decisions today. We're going to still discuss that. I see it's down in new business.
That's correct. And we're not making any final decisions that I know of.
Okay. Unfinished business is SharePoints. That's all. I wanted to ask if that was anywhere near.
Yeah, Justin, you have something on SharePoint?
Yeah, I'm looking into it as far as I believe it's a permissioning piece where we are as far as how people are using personal emails. I've actually reached out to Microsoft directly. I think we're probably going to have to get some sort of board email. So very similar to how the council members have their emails with their destination of, I believe, what area they're in as far as within the town. We probably need to have like board member 1, board member 2, as far as something like that for the personnel board in order to have that access provision. There is a security issue that will sometimes come up if you use a personal email. So a Gmail account, AOL account, whatever that might be, that can cause as far as those issues where you can't look at and share documents. So the next step is I'll have to reach out to the town manager to discuss as far as the possibility of us getting provisioned emails, and then going from there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Justin,
Yeah.
does that basically mean like, it'll be like an @townofmccandless.org email?
You got it. Yeah,
Okay.
so it'd be like personnel board, PB1, PB2, right?
Yeah.
And just to do that, because once we do that, that then puts us into the internal security provisioning. And then what we'll do is once we're issued those emails, we can go through the security protocols of us actually logging in. And once we get to that point, I can actually help everybody on the board as far as what we'll hold probably I'll create like some sort of training material, or we can meet one-on-one and where I can walk you through as far as how to do that.
Okay. And if we do it, let's just make sure like we make the emails, like you said, specific to personnel board. That way, if the heritage board also wants to do the same kind of thing, the town can come up with whatever naming convention they want, but let's just leave it open enough so that the other committees could, they wouldn't have to work around our names because we made them too generic.
No, sounds good.
Right, and you don't mind contacting Brian O'Malley or somebody else would you prefer somebody else there on the staff at town handle this, or do you still want to hold on to it?
I'll probably transition as far as somebody within the town to hold on to it. I'm actually waiting on just a couple more details as far as what we need from the security provisioning, because once we create those emails, there's going to have to be some administrative controls that we're going to have to allow on our own personal computers, as far as administratively, if a security breach were to happen, for instance, that there would be administrative access from the town where they could wipe as far as that email and any data concerning SharePoint that might be on our machines. It's just a security protocol. I'm just trying to get the final nuance on that to make sure that we're all understanding as far as what that would be. And then I'll work with the town as far as the actual creation of those emails and then the permission provisioning for that. So it'll probably be, I'm looking at before the next meeting, we'll all have access. We'll all have the emails and logins. Sorry.
Okay.
Hey, Justin, I'd like to make a point, and that is you should make the naming conventions unique, because as you have turnover, it creates problems. If, for instance, we use Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 3, all the way up to 7 at townofmcandless.com. And as we come in and out, then there's historical stuff that belongs to other people and it's not unique to you. So it really needs to be a unique naming convention.
That's an interesting conversation. And so I think that maybe this is something we need to further consider, because I'm just going to throw this out there. My understanding is all communications in local, state, and federal government are property of the government and not the individual. So we'd want to make sure we understand, as far as if we create the unique ones where no one could go back through and look, maybe an archiving procedure, because there might be data, for instance, that, let's say, for instance, I would resign from the board. Might be data as far as within my email that would be useful, or something that you need to reference back, or from an e-discovery standpoint, as far as if legal action was taken where you need to review that information and data. So we're going to want to talk through that as far as from an information protection standpoint, information archiving standpoint.
Well, maybe you do it by year that you get instilled. So, you could have personnel board member 1, 2023, and they can keep that until they leave. And if you have a second person in 2023, it could be 2023A. That way, what's proprietary to the first person is proprietary to them, but yet the town still has the capabilities to go back and retrieve that data.
It's a very, very good thought. I like that. But we'll work through that, because that is going to be a little bit more complex on that provisioning and privatization and data classification side. But for next meeting, we'll have emails, logins, and we'll have checked as far as make sure we all have access at that point.
Well, hi, Carolyn. Welcome to the meeting. Is there any other unfinished business that anybody has to bring up?
Nothing on my side.
All right, so the staffing metrics, is that what you were just discussing there, Justin, before?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the evaluation as far as based
Right.
on criteria.
Yep. just want to make sure that there wasn't two things you were working on. I thought it was the same.
Gotcha.
All right, so let's go to the rules and regulations that the document that was sent out and go through. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to bring up on that?
Oh, lots. Yeah, I've been trying to go through it. It's it's a lot of changes, but I have a question. Are these rules and regulations adopted by the town, or did they come to us from another entity, another government entity?
These are,
This is
and,
Falco.
David. Yeah, go ahead, Falco.
Yep. No, this was initially a draft that I prepared at my office that was pulled from another, or actually a couple different civil service commissions. That's why you'll see sometimes that reference. So it was meant as an initial draft to kind of kickstart and get the board discussing the issues that needed to be addressed.
Okay,
It's still
so,
in that form, still in the draft form.
right,
I'm sorry.
but we had something on our website that was our initial rules and regulations. So you kind of took those, added to them. I'm just trying to, because when I go back and forth,
Mm,
I'm wondering which document I'm looking at. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, there were on the website the ordinances that address the personnel board. That's not what this is intended to be. The ordinance was, again, still kind of viewed as the skeleton. The rules and regulations are putting the flesh on that skeleton. So nothing in these rules and regulations should contradict the ordinance. The ordinance is still what controls.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
So Rita, what
Sure.
what Falco's saying is that we need another level of written documentation that governs how we are going to operate, that's internal to us. It's not, and we can't do anything that contradicts what this council has given us. So that is the document that we're working on right now.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah. And I also think, just in case it threw anybody off, it looked like either Falco or Amy, I'm not sure who, might have taken some of that ordinance language, where it would be applicable and put them into the document. In particular,
That's
there's
correct.
one, yeah, so if you see language that's in the ordinance that's also in here, I think that's what happened, is that, before we finalize it, we have to make sure that the whole thing is consistent with the town ordinance, because we're bound by that. But then, like Matt said, everything else is just kind of that additional detail that we're trying to come up with ourselves to make us run smoothly. But if you notice that language, I think that's what happened, is either Falco or Amy added that in from the ordinance to that form document.
Yeah, and actually, when this draft was being developed, we were still in discussion on some of those recent amendments to the ordinance. So it was actually being developed at the same time that the ordinances were being finalized and adopted. So we have to, again, make sure that any final changes to those most recent revisions to the ordinance are consistent with what's in this template. The other thing to keep in mind is the process for the adoption of these. I had confirmed with Bob Grimm when he was there at the town, as well as with Steve Corbel, that over the years they've looked for an existing set of rules and regulations and could not locate them. So because nothing was in place at the personnel board, this draft, as far as the process, first has to be adopted by the personnel board, then it needs to be reviewed and approved by the town. So it's a two-step process that starts at the personnel board and finishes at the town. So there will be, I heard someone earlier saying that, it was being reviewed by the town as well, and that's fine. We can kind of jumpstart that process by having both review at the same time, but there does need to be then an adoption or an approval by the town as well.
Does it require a hearing, a public hearing?
That would depend on how you operate as a town. That would be more a question for Steve Corbel.
Okay.
Okay, so along these lines, I want to thank Brian for submitting some changes and recommendations. First of all, I'd like to recommend that we change the language of this document. So instead of a commission, we make it more applicable to
Yes.
who we are. And I went through and made some recommendations in that along those lines, but I think if getting that aside, that's not a big issue. I'd like to go down to what David wrote. And Dave, you want to talk about the inconsistency in the grading?
Sure. So I just basically, I really only focused on the scoring. I took a quick look at, we were supposed to focus, I think, on the alternates and on the scoring. The language for the alternates, I think, seemed fine, and maybe we make some small changes or something, but overall, I was okay with that. On the scoring, so the scoring sections start at section 3.10, which at least in my Word document is page 17. So 3.10, I think the testing process part, the second half of it, I think is set forward in the ordinance, but the first paragraph might even be set forth in the town ordinance as well. But that requires a weighting between the oral and written examinations, where the written examination is supposed to count 60% of the total score. Oral examination counts 40%. So that requirement is inconsistent with what is down in section 3.14. Because what 3.14 says is we add the written examination score to the oral examination score for a possible score of 200. But that process wouldn't weight those two scores, because you would just be adding a score out of 100 to a score out of 100. So in the comment, I put, what I would propose would solve that problem. Which that's all it would be is multiplying the two scores by their respective percentages, the written by 0.6 and the oral by 0.4. And then mathematically, to keep it on that 200 point scale, you then just have to multiply it by 2, because it's just how the math works. Somebody who's better at explaining math might want to explain that, but to keep it on a scale of 200, you just have to multiply it by 2.
Any comments on that?
Yes, this is Falco. You're correct that 3.10 is language from the ordinance. So that is the formula that has to be followed unless there's an amendment to the ordinance. So definitely the two sections need to be reconciled to make them in line with that ordinance language from 3.10. And I did take a look at your comments and those changes. And I agree, you have to still do that multiplication of the 0.6 and the 0.4 in order to bring it back in line with the ordinance formula.
And then eventually multiply it by 2 to get it on that 200 scale.
To get on the 200, and that would create the same percentage, when you do that math of the score number over the 200, should give you the percentage then.
Anybody have any objections to that?
It's a good catch.
At what point do you add points for other things? After?
The veteran's preference, I'm sorry.
Yes.
This is Falco again. The veteran's preference points, again, driven by the language in the ordinance, are then added after you come up with what is called the composite score, the combination of the written and the oral scores. Then the ordinance says that you add the 10 veterans preference points to that.
Can I ask, I understand, I love my vets, but other, I guess, classes of people get no points. And yet, when you look at in our document, it talks about how we do not discriminate against, any classes, veterans or anybody. But yet we only give points to one class. And I just wondered if that's normal, is that legal? I mean, there are protected classes, women.
Surely.
It's the law.
Yeah,
R-
no,
right.
it is
So,
law,
I
but
was
it's-
just going to say that, right. And number one, what somebody just mentioned, there's the Veterans Preference Act, which specifically requires that preference be given
oh,
to the
absolutely.
veterans in the initial hiring. Now, when you then do a test for promotional positions, as we've done, the veterans preference does not apply in that scenario. It's only in the entry level examinations and scorings that those points apply. And again, it's driven by statute, so it is a requirement under Pennsylvania law that preference be given.
Oh, absolutely. I'm fully aware of that. I'm not asking that.
Okay.
That's law, but
Okay,
I just
right.
wondered if in the great scheme of government, did they allow points for anybody else? Or is that the only one that's mandated by law?
Or of any other
To my
point system.
knowledge, that's the only one that specifically requires the preference.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not aware of any preference given for any other protected class.
Okay, and David, you went on to comment on some other things that some options for you want to talk about those?
Yeah, so for section 3.13, which is the actual scoring of the oral exam, I tried to think of something. I know just talking to like Carolyn and Jack, council wants us to be differentiating between candidates, to have a differentiation. So what I tried to do was come up with something where, number one, everybody's scores are being averaged. But number two, even with that, there's still a kind of a guarantee of separation between scores. And this is just a thought that I threw out there. And I only put down one option because I just, quite honestly, that one took me like an hour to put together. And I didn't start thinking of other options. But the basic idea of it is to say, okay, look, everybody who's going to grade the candidates grades them on a scale of 60 to 100, or if we change that to 50 to 100, whatever that scale is. Each person grades each candidate on that scale. Then those graders' scores are added together and averaged out for kind of a final oral exam score for each candidate. Any of the candidates who score under 70 or 80, whatever the ordinance requires as the passing score, I think it's 70. Anybody whose final score there is below 70 is eliminated because they didn't hit the minimum amount. Anybody who's 70 or higher is then eligible, they're eligible. But to make sure that there's differentiations in the scores, what my proposal basically says is you take the candidate with the highest score and you give them 100. You take the remaining candidates who have already scored over 70. You take the highest scored candidate, give them 100. The lowest scored candidate, give them a 70. And then for however many other candidates there are in between, you equally space them in the scoring. So if there's a total of 11 candidates, the lowest person would get a 70, then the second lowest would get a 73, and it would just go up 76, 79, 82, 85, 88, 91, 94, 97, 100. And they can be partial scores, if that's just how the math works out. It can be, okay, candidate 1 gets 70, candidate 2 gets 74.6. It doesn't matter. You're gonna get that spread so that we get a real spread in our ranking of the candidates there.
And you're talking about the individual ranking. So like each one of the board members that's interviewing has to score their candidates accordingly. Is that what you're saying, or is this after the final score?
No, this would be what this proposal is it would be after that. So all the interviewers give their grades, and that's their grade. All of this stuff happens kind of automatically after that. It's okay, the graders have given their grades, and now the process is we take those grades, we average them, we put them in an order, and then essentially we assign new grades that are evenly spaced between 70 and 100 automatically. We don't do any rescoring as interviewers, just the process does that scoring, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if I'm being clear.
I have a question.
Doesn't make sense.
You have to explain it.
I have a question. What if
Go ahead,
there are
Vince.
two candidates, one scores 92, the other scores 68? The one that scores 68 is given 70?
No, that
No.
person's eliminated because they didn't make 70% cutoff.
Okay, thank you.
So, David, I'm just trying to understand what is the benefit or outcome of doing this? Because what you're doing is you're taking all the interviewers are taking their scores, we're averaging out, and we have the final average score for each candidate. Now we're ranking them from 70 to 100 in even increments. What are we getting out of that?
We're getting differentiation. We're ensuring that there's differentiation in the scoring. Because
Isn't the
That-
differentiation in our scores themselves? Aren't we each individually giving scores? Isn't that the differentiation?
yes, but this guarantees the differentiation. I mean, like I said, I'm just throwing this out there as an idea. But I just know from talking to some council members that we as a board need to do a better job of differentiating between candidates.
Yes.
And this would guarantee that.
We're talking about a forced ranking system. Essentially,
Yeah.
that's what you're moving towards.
Yeah.
Right.
Come out of the
So in
scoring
other
of-
words, when the candidates, you're not going to get one that's a 93 and the other one's a 94. You're going to get ones that they're going to be spread evenly amongst each other. So even if there's a candidate with two candidates with the same score, then we're going to have to decide as the board of the interviewers.
Yes. And that
Who
was
gets-
that's part of what I wrote in there is if after the interviewers turn in their scores, if there are any candidates who are tied,
Well, I
we have to
remember,
take a
yes,
vote.
I saw that.
Yeah, we have to take a vote to break that tie before they're ranked. And,
Yeah.
Admittedly, that kind of sucks for the person who loses that vote because, for the candidate that loses that vote because they're going to drop down a level in scoring, but, there's not going to be a perfect scoring system no matter what we do.
Correct.
You know,
I like the concept of forced ranking, that way you could understand where the candidates are falling. The concern that does come to mind is we've scored them and tested them and scored them with their official score. Now we're
Manipulating.
rescoring the official score. You know what I mean? And so that goes into a little bit of a slippery slope in my mind.
And that's what
Yeah.
I was thinking too, Justin. I think it's starting to get too complex
Yes.
because especially if there's two tied results and then one person gets what they actually were assigned or one drops back, I just think that becomes a problem too.
Well, the thing to keep in mind, this only applies to the oral interviews. And the scoring for the oral interviews is already very subjective.
That's right.
So we're already taking a subjective this is already a subjective process, and this is actually trying to bind it to a little bit more objectivity by having a forced ranking.
Hey, David, would it be problematic if you had two at the same level?
My thought on it was that in order to help town council, we need to differentiate each and every candidate. So that's why I put in my thoughts, if two people's average scores from the oral interviews are equal, we have a separate vote to break that tie on the scores and then order them.
First of
But
all,
at the end of the day, this scoring is going into getting average with the written exam. So, I mean, if they had two people that got the same on the written exam, I mean, it's all going to kind of come out in the wash. If you lower one person, now they're not going to get as high on the final averages as somebody else, but you still might have two people that are same score, two different people
Yeah,
at the end.
yeah, and I mean, that's just, there's basically nothing we can do about that because the written scores are what they are. There's nothing we can do to change those. The weighting between the written scores and the oral scores is what it is. There's nothing we can do to change those. The only thing in the ranking process that we can change is scoring the oral interviews. So out of those three things, scoring the written exam, scoring the oral exam, and then weighting those two together for a composite score, the only thing that's within our control is the oral exam.
Well,
And so that's why I think real differentiation matters for what we're
True.
doing.
Well, let's take a hypothetical situation where, let's say we grouped a bunch of, at the end result is, without doing what you said, that there's a bunch of candidates that are grouped in a tight bunch. Some of them have the same score, other ones are one above, one below, whatever. You average that into the written exams, and all of a sudden there's a spread because they're obviously not all of them are going to have the same score on the written exam.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's right. But so the reason why I think the differentiation is important is that, and I know this is true for me as a grader, just as somebody who's done scoring for reviews and stuff like that. I'm not, if I think somebody is kind of qualified enough to give a passing grade to, I'm really reluctant to give them the minimum passing score. It's kind of like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, if they pass and they did good in the oral interview, kind of my internal mind thinking is they deserve between an 80 to 85 minimum. But now that's something that I would have to change if we didn't have a forced ranking. But the forced ranking just eliminates that problem for everybody. It's, it just says no matter what people's kind of, whether they tend to grade lower or grade higher, at the end of the day, we will come up with a list that's differentiated.
So at the end of the day, all we're doing really is taking the scores that our average of the interview board gets and then ranking them accordingly from 70 to 100.
Right.
Which I think is fair, because that's kind of the thing that I saw on the previous boards that we needed to do.
If two candidates are tied and you rank them differently, aren't you punishing one of the candidates? And aren't you having two scoring systems? One for written, one for oral?
Well, we have to have two scoring systems, one for written and one for oral. There's just by ordinance, there's no way around that.
Understood, but you're making them different.
I guess I'm not understanding the question with that, because it is going to be different, because the written exam is purely objective. There is no subjectivity involved in the written exam. The oral exam is, while we have some guidelines, it's pretty much completely objective. And so they're already different. One test is subjective and one test is objective. And what I hope this does is it actually makes the oral exam scoring more objective. It moves it closer to more objective.
I think it makes it more subjective.
Yes, I don't know who that is. Anyway, the whole point of an oral exam is to delve more deeply into how a person thinks, how they make their decisions. And that is totally subjective in a way, but not. You need to base your scoring on that. If you just go in and ask a question, oh, sure, anybody can answer. You may as well give them a piece of paper and a pencil and they can answer that question. But that's not the point of an oral exam. The point of an oral exam is to probe how he came to that answer. What was your thinking process? How does your logic work? That is something that is subjective and needs, I mean, it's not subjective if you proceed according to the guidelines we have. I mean, anybody can answer a question, right or wrong. That is not the point of the oral. You're also probing further, taking that answer and delving into it and asking them to go further. So I don't see what you're trying to do here.
Well,
Well,
hold
but
on.
that's all still taken into account. I mean, every single interviewer is still subjectively grading those interviews. It's just that the final score is there's forced differentiation in the final score. I mean, let's be honest, the scoring last time was a train wreck. It was an absolute train wreck. Council blames us for only being able to hire one officer. You can ask Carolyn and Jack sitting right next to you. They blame our board for that.
I do not blame our board for that. Here's what I see.
Well, that's fine for you, Rita, but ask Carolyn and Jack. Turn to your
No,
right
no,
and
no,
ask them.
I know, I'm
Hold on,
talking
stop.
about,
Hey, this
I'm
doesn't need to
talking
be
about the
heated.
person
Rita, calm down, please. I mean, this doesn't need to be a heated discussion. I know you're passionate about it and I appreciate your enthusiasm. And I understand where you're coming from. So I get your point. And David, just hold on a second. So here is the issue, is that each scorer, even though we have guidelines on how to score things, every human thinks differently and scores differently, and there's that subjectivity in there. So at the end of the day, when you have a group of people that we need to come up with a system to put our best candidate forward. So what we're doing is we're taking the candidates that gets the highest score, although it's a subjective highest score, we're just assigning a number from 70 to 0 according to a ranking system so that we can put them forward into to the board and after it gets averaged with the written exam, which will has a higher weighted average on it anyway.
right.
So that they go forward and we have a differentiation that Dave is talking about, so that we don't have somebody that's coming in and saying, oh no, and somebody who's trying to game the system and score a certain candidate low because they're a veteran or they're this or white or black. It doesn't matter. Those kind of things can happen. So this is a way to ameliorate that and get past it.
I guess I have to get a better handle on it, that I'm worried about that.
This
But
is Phil
so,
Covey.
yes,
Excuse me. If we, please refrain from any discussions about how the previous test was scored or how it was compiled. That would be an executive session discussion if there are concerns regarding that.
So Justin here, just a couple things, want to jump in. I think maybe if we take a step back and look at it as we'll have to discuss as far as what methodology we'd be using as far as in this oral exam portion. But I think the concept is we're doing a calibration session, right? So we have the interview, the oral interview. We need to calibrate as far as for the rankings. So David's proposed as far as the scoring methodology to kind of get us in that step there. I think what might be useful for us all, that way we're all on the same page and we kind of understand the concept. Maybe we prototype this. We do like this mock candidacy of 5 candidates, 3 candidates. We give scores and scenarios and situations. We look at it and see what questions kind of come out of that. As far as, okay, I would be confused and maybe I would score this person a 75 and let's say you scored them a 76. How do we reconcile these things, or how does this affect the general scoring? I think that might be useful because I'm hearing a lot of questions on the conceptual, essentially the pieces that might be at odds with one another or the challenges that might come out of that. Let's take a step back. Let's prototype this. Let's consider this a calibration session in a methodology of we know we need to do something to better document and come out of the oral exam with a better result and kind of go from there. Does that make sense?
yes.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd add too is I am not tied to this but I also don't see any other proposals on the table. And so, I mean, so what I would say is if we're gonna mock something up, then other people also need to come up with their ideas on how to fix the scoring.
Absolutely,
And so that we can mock them all at the same time.
sure.
You know,
And,
so I'm
think that'll-
passionate about this right now because to me, it's strongly preferred to our current method. But if somebody comes up with another option, I am all ears. I just didn't see anybody circulate around any other options.
No, nobody did. So, first, I think we need to define the problem we're trying to fix, though, and I don't think that's quite clear, certainly not in Rita's mind, I can tell from her questions. So we need to come up with a problem statement that says, this is the problem we're trying to fix.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
As far as next steps, it sounds like let's define our problem, and we might find out that we're defining it different ways, right? And then come to an agreement and then work on, I think that the step after that, depending on what that problem statement is, would probably be some sort of prototyping or mock example. And then for us to evaluate, and it might have to like a tabletop exercise just very quickly as far as see what this would turn into and see what questions come out of that. But I commend David for, you know, trying to address this situation and coming up with a methodology. I know it's tough, you know, pulling it from thin air, but I think this is a good conversation. I'm glad
David-
people are passionate about it.
Right, and David didn't just give one option, he gave a couple options in his document. I don't know, did you send that to everybody, David, or is that just to?
I did, but I don't think I actually ever kind of finished the second option. So I was going to give multiple options and then I just kind of ran out of time.
Would you mind coming up with a problem statement so that we can put it forth through the board and
Yeah,
for next time?
yeah, I can circulate something and I'll circulate it, you know, amongst us all. Oh, well, Falco, are there, because this concerns
Yeah, well,
scoring, is it
if you
something I
send-
should not circulate to everybody on the? How does that
Well, if you
work?
send it to everybody, and as long as everybody doesn't start commenting on it, I think it's fine, but it's
Oh,
when we start
okay.
having a public discussion that it becomes a sunshine law act.
Okay,
That's correct.
okay, so yeah, I'll just put something together and then, you know, I'll send it to everybody. And then I guess, maybe if people have thoughts on it, either respond to me or maybe respond to Matt or Amy to kind of collect the thoughts before the next meeting. But not to everybody. Don't reply to everybody because then that would get into the discussion territory.
Correct. And if everybody would just continue to go through that document and submit your changes or recommended changes, I'll clean up the document that I submitted that changed the language so that you're not looking at a bunch of corrections or you know, where I can send you know, one that has the corrections and one that's everything's cleaned up so you guys can compare it to see if you're good with that language and we can try to get past that. But any procedure changes like the scoring and the ranking, that kind of stuff, I would recommend, David, that I agree with your what we discussed before. And if nobody's opposed to it, I'd like to see, you know, if you want to put together the language that we could put in there for how to multiply it by 2 and all that kind of stuff. Because you had it in your notes section. It wasn't really language that you wanted to include in the document itself.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, just like more of an explanation of how that works or like the actual language I was.
The actual language, yeah, just
Okay.
because you already explained it in the comment section. Just put
Yeah.
it, you know, create the language that would go into the documents, because I don't think anybody's opposed to what you were saying.
Okay, yeah, no, just sometimes in my
Not-
head, my explanations make total sense but then when other people read them, they're like, what the hell are you talking about? So just wanted to make sure that it made sense and.
No, I read your comments and it made 100% sense. And I just wanted you to explain it so that the people, especially the public, could hear it.
Okay, cool.
And can Justin still do a mock-up of how it would look for us?
Like an example piece,
Yeah.
like a visual.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, like shows like examples of scores and then how they would convert it or changed, I guess, or rated. I
That
should
would be
say.
very helpful.
Yeah, same for me.
If someone else could take that on, I'd appreciate it, only just because the other piece it's going to take me a significant amount of work. So maybe David, that might be an area that you could lead on that side as far as with the
Yeah,
scoring, not just the model, but also the examples.
yeah, I mean, I can't promise like a pretty presentation, but I can set out,
Okay.
like an example.
That would be good.
Yeah,
Yeah, so-
Also,
Go ahead,
Are-
Rita.
are we being limited? I mean, it doesn't discuss it here, but are we being limited to a score? Last time there was discussion of whether we could actually give a 40% or a 50% or whatever it is that we thought a person deserved. Is there going to be limits on this? I don't see that in the document here, that as far as I've gotten. Is there?
It is in the document that Amy sent. Let me just see if I can find it really quick.
Just tell me the page, because I haven't gotten through the whole thing, because I was really making
Yeah,
notes.
it's in section 3.13,
Oh, yeah,
which
yeah.
with my settings, it's on page 18 of 34. But depending on how your margins are set and stuff, it might be a different page number, but it's section 3.13.
Okay, and also it says at least 2, preferably 3 or more members. I think 2 should be eliminated. You should always have an odd number of scores. It should never be 2.
Yeah, that's one of the comments I made, was at least 3. So because they'll end up getting averaged, but I agree with you that 2, it should never be as low as 2.
All right, are there any other comments or issues somebody wants to bring up on this document this time? It sounds like not everybody had the opportunity to go through it as deeply as they wished.
I have my individual comments and some edits, and I'll send that to you directly, Matt. As far as it's very small. I did a track change, that way you'll be able to see as far as what it is, and I've called it out also in the column, in the comments. Just a couple of nuances here and there, more or less calling the question also some of the things that Amy had highlighted. So nothing material for this meeting, I don't think.
Yeah, you can go ahead and send it to everybody on the board.
Okay,
Again, as
excellent.
long as we don't respond back and start commenting on your comments.
Sounds good, will do.
Any other anything else anybody wants to bring up? Rita?
No, I don't think so. I think we still have a lot of discussion on this to get through it and make the changes we need to make. But I think we have to be careful and deliberate, because it is really important. It's a really important thing we're doing.
All right, Ryan, do you have anything? Do you want to?
I
Ryan.
think it's constructive communication here. Just stand by listening.
Okay, so I'll open it up to public comment if I think Deborah, you had a question or?
No, you answered my question, Matt. Thank you very much. But I was thinking, as you all were talking, I think that's a great idea, just as reinforcement to set up a tabletop or, to try this. And I applaud David for bringing something to the table, as you all said. Let me just look at my notes 1 second. And you said that there is a rubric. The only other thought I would have would be, I'm not sure, is the written exam just right or wrong answers, or are there essays with the written exam? That was my question.
Just right and wrong answers.
So you may want to consider adding some type of an essay, just maybe short, because it's been my experience that officers do a lot of writing as well. And this would give you an opportunity to also score some of that. They have to do a lot of descriptive writing in their reports and things like that. So that's something to consider as well. You might want to add to the scoring system. And I'm not quite sure, I'm not that involved in the scoring system, so I'm not quite sure I understand exactly what David's mindset is there. I sort of got it, but I'd like to see more on that. So that's something that you could look at. And also I would look, you said there is a rubric for the oral exam. You might want to look at that, just to see if it needs tweaked at this point.
Yeah, we've extensively gone through that.
Okay,
before.
thank you. That's all I have.
Yeah.
Thank you for all your work. It sounds great that you're attempting this.
Thanks, Deborah. Vince, did you have anything?
Not at this point, thank you.
Okay, any other comments or concerns before we adjourn?
Glenn Nelson. I'm hearing this talk about you're automatically giving somebody 50 points.
I don't know where you got 50 points from, but I think you're maybe
Well,
referring
when
to
you were
the vet-
scoring, when you were giving a score out, you said that you had a 100-point score and somebody would automatically get 50.
Nobody ever said anything like that. No.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
I have some comments of a different nature.
Go ahead, Vince.
I was a member of the McCandless Citizens Police Academy last year, and Ryan Hawk might remember me. I have a high respect for our police force and the police chief. We need to be sure that the methods and tactics and procedures that you go through get the best candidates available for the positions open on the police force. The next point is the best communication between the citizens of McCandless and the police force would occur whenever the cross-section of individuals on the police force matches the cross-section of individuals in the community.
And what are you saying by that?
The demographics, there's white officers, we need black officers, we need female officers, we need Asian officers.
Okay. Any other public comments? All right, anything else that anybody wants to bring up as the last item before we adjourn?
Thank you for conducting the meeting. and
Oh, thanks, Rita.
Keeping us on track.
Getting this done early.
Thank you much, Matt.
Yeah,
Well, I
thank
know
you.
Jack
Great
has a
job.
tea time. We had to get finished.
Hey, Matt, I just want to, this is Cynthia, really appreciate Deborah's comments. I think that is good because everyone tests differently. So it is important to have the standardized testing and also have that written comment area, or at least a small written portion. It helps you to get better insight into the thinking methods of the individual, and it gives them a chance to express themselves in a way that maybe they're stronger, and as opposed to maybe just a standard test. And finally, it is important, as Deborah mentioned, the officers do a lot of writing, so it is important to see a writing sample. So I just appreciated her input, and thank you for conducting the meeting so well as well.
Thanks, Cynthia. Yeah, I do think the essay idea is a valid idea to have it as a future discussion to add to the mix for canvassing for candidates. But we'll have to put that to another agenda item in the future. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, that's it. Well, this is a conclusion of the meeting. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt.
Yep, bye.